Welcome back to the segment Under the Loupe, and today we have a very special watch to discuss, and we're going to do things a little differently today. We're actually going to break the watch down part by part, price by price, to show you why this watch is actually worth what it is. So let's dive right into it. This watch is a 1966 silver dial 6240. At a quick glance, it really looks like a 6263 silver dial, but when you really look closely, it starts to come alive as a different reference number, and I'll explain to you why. The biggest difference between this and a 6263 is the fact that the dial layout isn't going to be quite the same. You're going to have more of the 6239 or the older reference layout. As you can see, this is what they call the big Daytona dial, because at the third line of the dial, you'll see the word Daytona is the biggest word on the dial, which is not a trait found on the 6263 or the 6265. Can only find that trait on this reference. And another thing that's going to set this watch apart is the early set of hands that you have here, much thinner than you would see on a 6265 or 6263. Also, those pushers, which were found on very early 6263s, are also only found on this reference 6240, which are the prototype Mark Zeros. Again, very beautiful watch, very strong presence on the wrist. And let's dive into why it costs so much money. The bracelet, not the most expensive part on the watch, pretty commonly found on a lot of watches. That's going to be $2,000. Case back, if we have to go find one, it is stamped 6239. They did not stamp these 6240, so most of these case backs on 6241, 6240s, and so on are actually going to have the 6239 case back. Regardless, if you need a 6239 case back, expect to pay anywhere between $2,000 to $3,000, but for the sake of the video, let's put $3,000. Pushers. These are very, very, very rare pushers. These are probably the hardest pushers to find, and if you do find them, good luck, because these are extremely hard to find. One, in excellent condition, and two, in the correct configuration. These are the Mark Zero prototype pushers, which are, interestingly enough, they're made out of brass. They're not even made out of stainless steel. That's why they look so distorted and they look so aged and discolored. You can find these things almost bright yellow. You can find them discolored to a more like used brassy look. Sometimes they turn brown. In this particular watch, they're a little bit more brownish. Typical pair of these pushers costs $14,000. The next part that holds everything together, the mid case. The mid case on this is going to have obviously your serial number and reference number at the 6 and the 12. And if you ever had to find this part, it is nearly impossible. I've not seen one in the market in years. But I'm going to give it a price point in this situation of $10,000. The movement. This would carry a 72B movement, which is not impossible to find, but not easy to find. But you could typically expect to pay anywhere between $20,000 to $25,000. But for the sake of this video, it is $20,000. Most importantly, to make this watch come together and to be all correct is the dial. Finding one of these dials is, again, it's a task. Finding parts for vintage Daytonas is a task in its own. You know, if I've seen them floating around, typically I've seen service dials from about $5,000 to $8,000, depending on configuration of that service dial, and factory dials being non-Paul Newmans up to about $15,000. Being the condition of this dial is excellent, I'm going to give it a price point of $15,000 loose. And if you have to find one, again, it's not easy to find. Assembling one of these by part would be nearly impossible and probably would take years to finish out. Good thing we have it here available. We don't have to break this watch down. Let's talk about the bezel. This is a very, very unique bezel in the sense that it is used on some heavy, heavy hitters. It is a Mark I. It is the earliest variation of this bezel, and what's going to be interesting about it is that it could be found on a 6240 Paul Newman, it could be found on a 6241 or 6239 or very early 6263s. So the bezel itself is very versatile in what it could be applied to, because it is very, very much a desirable bezel if somebody needed it. So for that, it is an $18,000 bezel. I have recently sold one for a little bit under that, and the buyer very much was appreciative because he made his Paul Newman correct. The hand set. Hands are not very easy to find on these watches, and they're also not cheap. For a set of hands, which you don't really loose, they look kind of funny because they're so small independently, they don't look like much. But if you have to find a set of hands for this watch, expect to pay $3,000. Crystal. This is probably the cheapest part on the watch, is a Tropic 21 crystal. And if you need one, you're going to pay roughly $300 to $600. But for the sake of the video, $300. And that gives us a grand total of $85,300 in just parts. But for the sake of having the watch all together, scarcity, rarity, and all that other fun stuff, we are going to value this watch at $95,000 market price today. So if you're interested in this watch, hit up the website. We do have it available for sale, or hit me up directly. Thank you guys for watching this video, and let me know in the comments below if you want to see another watch broken down by price.